The Kidder Massacre took place close to what is now Goodland, Kansas, on July 2, 1867. In this tragic event, Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne warriors launched an attack on a group led by 2nd Lieutenant Lyman S. Kidder, consisting of 10 enlisted men and an Indian scout. This skirmish unfolded amid Hancock's War on the Western Plains. On June 1, 1867, Lieutenant Colonel George A. Custer departed from Fort Hays, Kansas, leading approximately 1,100 men of the 7th Cavalry to suppress Indian uprisings posing a threat to the region. After conducting patrols northward to Fort McPherson on the Platte River in Nebraska, Custer and his troops moved southward to the forks of the Republican River near Benkelman, Nebraska. While on patrol, the soldiers observed daytime smoke signals and nighttime flaming arrows, but they did not enter into hostilities. Meanwhile, General William T. Sherman, in charge of the forces at Fort Sedgwick near Julesburg, Colorado, aimed to communicate with Custer. He assigned the task to 25-year-old Lieutenant Lyman S. Kidder of Company M, 2nd Cavalry, instructing him to locate Custer and deliver the messages. Embarking on the journey toward the presumed encampment of Custer and his men at the forks of the Republican River, approximately 90 miles southeast of Fort Sedgwick, Kidder, accompanied by a 10-man patrol and a Sioux Indian guide named Redbead, departed from the fort on June 29th. Kidder arrived at Custer's campsite on the evening of July 1st, only to discover it deserted. Unaware that Custer had moved on, scouting to the south and then northwest, Kidder, under the moonlight, confused a trail left by a wagon train sent by Custer to Fort Wallace for the actual path Custer had taken. Consequently, he and his men followed the incorrect route. Around noon the following day, a Lakota group discovered Kidder's party north of Beaver Creek, a tributary of the Republican River. The Lakota promptly informed nearby Cheyenne Indians, and the warriors approached the soldiers. Spotting the Indians, Kidder and his troops changed course to the southeast, heading for the valley of Beaver Creek, approximately 12 miles north of present-day Edson, Kansas. While fleeing, some soldiers were shot on a ridge above the creek, but the remaining forces reached a defensive position in a small gully about 50 yards north of the creek. Unfortunately, the Lakota dismounted and stealthily approached on foot, while the Cheyenne encircled the gully. Despite the soldiers' valiant efforts, which included killing 2 Indian horses, they were vastly outnumbered. Kidder, his entire troop, and the Lakota scout were killed, with some enduring torture before their deaths, and their bodies were mutilated and burned. 2 Lakota warriors, including Chief Yellow Horse, also lost their lives in the skirmish. Meanwhile, Custer, not having received any communication from General William T. Sherman, initiated the movement of his troops toward Fort Sedgwick. Upon reaching Riverside Station, about 40 miles to the west, he telegraphed the fort for updated orders. Discovering that he had missed the Kidder patrol and concerned for their well-being, he promptly turned back south. Along the trail, they first encountered a deceased Army horse, followed by signs of a skirmish for a few miles along Beaver Creek. On July 12th, they discovered the decomposed bodies of Kidder and his party in a ravine north of Beaver Creek in northern Sherman County, Kansas. The corpses had suffered severe mutilation, with all individuals scalped except for the Indian guide. Each corpse bore between 20 to 50 arrows, and these arrows were discovered exactly as the ruthless assailants had left them, protruding from the bodies. The men were initially laid to rest in a collective grave on a hill overlooking the ravine, but were later relocated to Fort Wallace. In the 1880s, the bodies, with the exception of Lieutenant Kidder, were transferred to Fort Leavenworth. Judge Kidder, Lieutenant Kidder's father, arrived in Sherman County in February 1868, confirmed his son's identity through a shirt made by his mother, and brought the body back to their Minnesota home. Lieutenant Kidder was interred in the family plot in St. Paul. On August 3, 1969, the Friends of the Library of Goodland, Kansas, conducted a dedication ceremony for a historical marker and monument.